morning. Today we are going to review the lymphatic system and immunity. The lymphatic system includes the lymph vessels, the lymph nodes, certain organs of the body and tissues, and then of course the immune system is going to be our B cells and T cells and antibodies and sort of our cellular immunity. So this is a sort of a long chapter. There's a lot going on here. I don't like that you can't ask me any questions, but I'm going to do the best I can to just give you an overview of the sort of the highlights from the chapter. So the lymphatic system, as we sort of move through the chapter, right, we're going to look at the lymphatic system, then we're going to look at the lymph vessels, lymph nodes, and then other lymphoid cells, tissues, and organs. And then at the end of this presentation, or the second part of this presentation, will be the immune system. So basically, the lymphatic system includes lymphatic vessels. So everything here in green is going to be lymph. So as we've learned previously, blue means vein, red means artery for the most part. Those sort of light purpley pink in the middle are going to be the capillaries, and the green now vessels are going to be the lymph vessels. And basically, the notice how on the right-hand side of the little circle, there is an end to it. So unlike the arteries and veins that sort of form a circle or a cycle throughout the body, the lymph vessels are one-way vessels. They go from the tissues up towards the heart. And they basically are there to pick up any fluid that doesn't circulate back into the blood from the interstitial fluid. So the interstitial fluid is around the cells, outside the cells, and the lymph fluid is there to sort of pick up any leftover fluid. So the lymph vessels carry, again, one-way system, so they go from the tissues towards the heart, and it starts with these lymph capillaries. And again, you can see that on the right-hand side. They're very highly permeable, so those little flap-like mini valves just sort of open up, and fluid and proteins, all kinds of things. They're not tight junctions. They're not like the arteries and veins in that way. And we have these little collagen anchors that sort of open and close and hold those flaps and those valves open. So large proteins, right, can enter the lymph fluids, salts, all kinds of things can go in there. They're very permeable. And so the lymphatic vessels, again, go in one direction, but they are, let's see what I have here. They are low pressure, similar to veins. So they work in a similar mechanism to veins in that the fluid moves through the lymph system through our respiratory, right, the expanding and contracting of our chest muscles, bending, stretching, the contraction of our hands, contraction of our arms and legs, the muscle contraction squeezes the lymph vessels and pushes that fluid up towards the heart. On the top left, you can see there's a little black circle, and it's surrounding what's called a collecting lymphatic vessel with valve. And so similar to the veins of the legs and arms, etc., they have valves that ensure one directional flow up towards the heart. So skeletal muscle contractions, diaphragmatic breathing, the change in pressure in the chest, as well as the valves prevent backflow. They work very similar to veins. Again, they're blind-ended, so there's not a cycle. They start at the bottom, and they flow into these collecting ducts, the bigger lymph vessels, and then towards what are called the lymphatic trunks, and then to the thoracic duct, which drains into, right, so you can see that right up there on the top left and the top right, right here, right, this is the lymphatic duct, and right here, right, this is going to be the thoracic duct. And so they're going to drain into the subclavian, that little division there, and then into the superior vena cava. So all of the lymph comes up, squeeze, 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 and is eventually dumped into the venous system. Now, for the most part, the most of the body empties into the thoracic duct. We do have this right lymphatic duct, which does take care of the right side of the head and the right arm, but the rest of the body, the whole lower body, the trunk, the left side of the body is drained through what's called the thoracic duct. And you can see here these very, very large vessels in green that empty right into the venous system. So if we're looking at sort of the whole body, right, minus the lower leg, you can see a collection of vessels and then a collection of little sort of dots. These little things here are called lymph nodes. And we have collections of lymph nodes and in our abdomen, in our armpits, in our neck, in our chest, right? These are where all the lymph nodes are. For the most part, in the arms and the legs, you just have ducts. And then we have the little nodes, little nodes, little nodes. And all of these are feeding into, right, the major veins of the upper body and then eventually into the vena cava. Now, when, and again, oh, in this picture as well, sorry I didn't mention it, you can see how this piece is green or light yellowish green, and that's showing you the right-hand side of the body that's drained by the lymphatic duct. And then you can see here the entirety of the lower body, most of the trunk, and the left-hand side of the body is drained by the thoracic duct. Again, another picture of it, right? Lymphatic nodes, there are cervical lymph nodes, thoracic duct, etc., etc. And then this is also showing other lymphoid organs and tissues, right? That would be the tonsils, the thymus, the spleen, and what we're going to call malt. Now, when we're talking about the lymph system, there are actually lymphoid cells. So there are lymphoid cells, the lymphocytes that arise in the bone marrow, and you can see that here. And we've talked about lymphocytes when we talked about blood before, and now we're going to kind of focus in a little bit more on what they do. And these lymphocytes are produced in the blood. And again, when we did blood, we talked about the hematopoietic stem cell and the production of white blood cells and red blood cells. So you can go back and take a look at that if you'd like. These lymphocytes arise in the bone marrow, and then they're going to mature into one of two different things, either a T cell or a B cell. And we're going to go into that when we get into the immune system a little bit. But the T cells basically manage the immune response. They sometimes directly attack infected cells and destroy them. The B cells are going to be those cells that produce antibodies. So we have lymphocytes, then we have macrophages, we have dendritic cells, and then we have reticular cells. And they all do different things in the lymph tissue, right? The macrophages phagocytize things. They also activate the T lymphocytes. The dendritic cells actually capture antigens like viruses and different things that are going to help to trigger the antibody response and bring them back to the lymph nodes. And then the reticular cells support the other cell types. Right? So there's a whole bunch of different types of cells in the lymph fluid or in the lymph system. So the lymphoid tissues house and provide a site for the lymphocytes to proliferate. And so here we have our primary lymphoid organs, which are the thymus and the bone marrow, right? The bone marrow are where the B cells mature, B for bone. The thymus is where the T cells mature, T for thymus. So these are our primary lymphoid organs. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see your tonsils, your spleen, your Peyer's patches, your appendix. These are going to be your secondary lymphoid organs. This is where those mature lymphocytes are going to encounter their antigens and then become activated. So these are sort of, this is a place where there's a lot of entry into the body, right? The spleen is big with, the blood and that sort of stuff. Down here, the Peyer's patches, we have a lot of toxins and things going on in our intestines. So it makes sense that we have these sort of antigen receptor type things here as well as here, right? And then, of course, the spleen that involved with things that sort of roll around in the blood. So the lymph nodes filter and destroy microorganisms. The lymph nodes have sort of a strategic or a specific in and out system. So the afferent lymphatic vessels that you see all around the outside of that kidney-shaped organ are where the lymph fluid will come in. And then in the cortex, we're going to have a filtering, right? There's all kinds of, they're going to destroy microorganisms. There's phagocytizing cells in there. And then sort of the cleaned version of the lymph goes out the efferent. So it goes in the efferent, it gets cleaned up and out the efferent lymphatic vessels to continue back into the blood. So the lymph system is going to filter and remove and try to destroy most of the microorganisms that enter the body that shouldn't be there. So the fluid will sort of go through the cortex of the lymph node and get sort of cleaned. And from there, it goes into the efferent lymphatic vessels and then right up to the blood. This is another picture of it here, right, with the afferent vessels, the cortex, the efferent vessels, and again, but same process. The lymph fluid goes in, it gets filtered and cleaned, and goes out the other side. This is a picture of the spleen. You'll notice how the spleen is very, very vascular. It's going to remove blood-borne pathogens, all right, and old and aging red blood cells. So the spleen sort of does its cleaning of the blood. The tonsil, right, attempts to pick up on any microorganisms, bacteria, and things that enter through the mouth or nose, right? And so when the lymphocytes are created in the red blood, in the bone marrow, right? Those cells are then sort of exported to either the bone marrow or the thymus, and they are sort of mature in those areas. And so what we're going to talk about now is the immune system. And the immune system is an extension, of course, of the lymph system. A lot of what we're going to talk about in regards to the immune system occurs in the organs. So when we talk about the immune system, we need to separate, or we do separate the immune system into two functional areas or functional processes. One of them on the left-hand side you can see is called the innate defenses. Now the innate defenses are always on, always prepared. They're the first line of defense, your skin, etc., etc. And then on the right-hand side we have what are called our adaptive defenses, and those are going to be specific, meaning you have an antibody for the flu. Boom, those two things are specific, right? Your flu antibody does nothing for the common cold, does nothing for salmonella poisoning, whatever. So the adaptive defenses are going to be more specific for a certain pathogen or invader. So we're going to talk a little bit first about the innate defenses. We have external and we have internal. So the external innate defenses basically are the skin, or is the skin, and all the skin does for us, that's protective. So the skin is highly keratinized epithelial membrane, meaning waterproof, multi-layered, right? So that's a protective mechanism right there. There are mucous membranes that represent a physical barrier to most microorganisms because we have protective chemicals, right? We have an acid, an enzyme called lysozyme. We have mucin and defensins and antimicrobial peptides. There's all kinds of stuff when we talk about our surface barriers, our mucous membranes, and our skin. So all of that sort of in the top pink box up there are going to be our innate defenses, always on. Part one is the skin. If something gets past the skin, usually through eyes, nose, mouth. Sometimes if you cut yourself, right, you can get bacteria in, but for the most part, it's going to come from a break in the skin or one of our soft bits, any of our entrances, right, that aren't as well protected as the keratinized, multi-layered, oily, waterproof skin, right, mouth, eyes, reproductive organs, etc., etc. So our skin is our first line of defense, our external surface barrier. Then we have our internal innate defenses. So these are things that are not specific. It doesn't have anything to do with what type of flu or the coronavirus or anything specific. It is just a general innate protective defense. Basically three-ish phagocytes, the neutrophils and the macrophages. So remember when we talked about our white blood cells, we talked about two of the cells being phagocytizers, meaning they surround, engulf, and destroy. And those are going to be our neutrophils and the macrophages. They will find the pathogen, they will engulf it, right? Of course, they have to be able to stick to it. So they have these sticky proteins on the outside called opsonins. And the macrophages right, that we talk about came from the monocytes, right? So it's actually neutrophils and monocytes, but macrophages. They're going to engulf them and destroy them. The second thing are something called the natural killer cells, right? They sound so scary, but they're non-specific. What they basically do, they lyse and kill cancer cells and virally infected cells. So if you've had the flu virus, if God forbid you have the coronavirus, your natural killer cells are going to be what is called on to attack and kill your own cells that have been virally infected. So natural killer cells. They lyse, meaning burst open, cancer cells as well as virally infected cells. And again, this is before the adaptive immunity. This is just they're prowling around and they've found it. And then lastly, we have our inflammation process. Now, inflammation is listed in that blue box as sort of another thing on the list, but inflammation actually is kind of a complex process. So, oh, look at me. I am far behind. All right, so let's go over these these slides. I thought I was sticking to the first one. So this first one, innate defenses, the physical barrier of the skin, the phagocytizers from the macrophages, the neutrophils, etc., monocytes, the natural killer cells, molecules called interferons are released to coordinate defenses against viral infections. Complement. All right, how did I miss this? Where am I? Maybe I have it on the next page. Anyway, complement is a system of proteins that assist antibodies. Oh, that's because we're going to talk about complement when we get to the adaptive defenses. Inflammation. Look at all the different things that inflammation does for us. Increases blood flow, activates those chompy macrophages, increases permeability, meaning fluid to the area, activates complement, which means antibodies, stimulates clotting reaction, meaning we're going to encapsulate it, increases the temperature, means we're going to cook it. Whatever's in there, we're going to increase that temperature and we're going to really cook whatever it is. And then it's going to activate our secondary line of defense, which are the adaptive defenses. So inflammation is incredible, right? It occurs anytime the body's tissues are injured. We're going to get to that in a sec. And then fever, the elevation of the body temperature, speeds up metabolism and the activity of our defenses, and also may play a role in reducing the spread of the virus and the bacteria in the body. Fascinating. Again, another table talking about the first line of defense, right? The skin and the mucous membranes and all of the different protective mechanisms that come with that. Here we have a macrophage using its cytoplasmic extensions to pull in and engulf bacteria. It's almost like a fishing rod. It sends it out, grabs it, and pulls it in, and then destroys it. All right, so this is one of our macrophage phagocytizers. Here we are. So here we are at tissue injury, inflammation, etc. Inflammation is beneficial because it prevents the spread of damage, disposes of the debris and pathogens, alerts the adaptive immune system, and sets up for a repair. Now, we can see all of this stuff happening here. It results from the release of inflammatory chemicals. So you can see up here, this person cut themselves, and here we have histamine, complement, kinins, prostaglandins are all going to be inflammatory chemicals. All right, and this is really important because, because any one of these chemicals is going to induce various portions of our inflammatory response. We want to dilate the arteries so that we can have increased blood flow, heat, redness, increased temperature. We want to increase capillary permeability so that we can have protein-rich fluid, right? Here, and again, that's going to help to bathe the area. It's going to help with the sort of healing process. Here we're attracting neutrophils, right? And then they're going to go over and be helpful in getting rid of any pathogen that may have entered when the skin was breached. So this is a great little flow chart. Sort of take a minute, read it through, and see what, see if little things sort of pop out. So Number one, we have inflammation, right? It results from the release of inflammatory chemicals from damaged cells that cause vasodilation and increased capillary permeability. Soon after that, right, with the neutrophils and macrophages enter, and they start to phagocytize anything that came in, right? So, again, this is going to be sort of the steps of inflammation: leukocytosis, margination, diapedesis, and chemotaxis, right? And these are the different steps that occur, right, in the process of tissue repair and inflammation. And basically, we want to increase the amount of fluid, increase the amount of white blood cells, right? Increase the clotting. We want to reduce the area of infection, right? All of these things are important in that. This is just a little table about the different and various inflammatory chemicals that the body has. Here we have two cells that are going to be affected by interferon, right? And so interferons are small proteins that are produced by virally infected cells that help to protect the surrounding healthy cells, right? So that the virus can't replicate. So this cell gets infected, cell number one, and it produces interferon that then helps the other cell by blocking viral production up here. So interferon is produced by a sick cell to help the cells near it. It's kind of a really, really fascinating interaction between cells. And then we have complement. Now, complement is a group of about 20 or so proteins that destroy foreign pathogens in the body. They lyse microorganisms, and then they also sort of call up, right? They're going to trigger the alternative pathway and sort of help the adaptive part of our immunity. Lastly is fever. And fever is an abnormally high body temperature in a systemic response to a microorganism. And again, the body temperature goes up, so that metabolism goes up, and also may inactivate some of those microorganisms at a higher temperature. So now we are going to discuss the adaptive immune response. All right, so what we're going to do now is talk about the adaptive defenses. Now, the thing about the adaptive defense is that they are slower to respond, but they are specific. So this is why it takes a week or two to get over a cold, right? Because your body has to find the virus, identify the virus, make an antibody to complement that virus, and then attack the virus. So it does take a bit of time, right? There are three important aspects of the adaptive immune response. Number one, that they have to recognize and destroy a specific antigen. Number two, it's systemic, so it's everywhere in the body. It's not just where phagocytizing cell happens to come across the bacteria. It's systemic, and it has a memory. So our immune system will remember something it has seen already and be ready to attack it so it doesn't infect us twice. Now, we have two branches to the adaptive immune response. The first one, as you can see here, is called humoral immunity, and that's provided by the antibodies, by the B lymphocytes. And then we have cellular immunity, which is going to be from the T cells. And we're going to get that in a minute. So two branches, humoral and cellular, are both part of the adaptive immune response, meaning specific. Now, all of this depends on something called an antigen, which we'll get to in a minute. And an antigen is going to be a substance that mobilizes the adaptive response. An antigen is going to be something that tells the immune system, oh, we should get rid of this. All right. Now, when we talk about the cells of adaptive immunity, right, we want to talk about the T cells and the B cells. And now the B cells are humoral immunity. The T cells are non-antigen producing cellular immunity. And then we have something called the APC cells, and they're sort of auxiliary helpers, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the T cells, approximately 80% of the lymphocytes in the body are T cells. 4 different types of T cells, as you can see here. Now, when we, hold on, I'm just looking forward to see, all right, we will talk about this again. Then we have the B cells. About 10 to 15% of your circulating lymphocytes are B cells, and they are going to differentiate into plasma cells, which make antibodies. And then on the far right, you see something called an NK cell, and those are going to be the remaining like 5% of the circulating antibodies. Now, what does this mean? So when we talk about the antigens, right? This is an antigen, and it is binding these 3 different antibodies. Now, this antigen specifically has the triangle, the half circle, and the square as their sort of shapes, right? They're antigenic determinants. And an antibody can be created to match up with any of those shapes to neutralize that antigen. So they bind to any free antibody or activated lymphocyte, right, depending on shape. So this goes back to biology when you took it, that talks about the importance of protein shape. All right, so here we are at our B and T cell, pathway. So we'll notice at the top that we have the lymphocyte precursors being created in the red bone marrow. That's the origin. Right? They're going to start in the red bone marrow. And then we're going to go through a process called maturation. Now, this is where those lymphocytes have to make a decision. If they go to the thymus, then they are going to become T cells. T cells mature in the thymus, so T for thymus. If the lymphocyte is going to become a B cell, it will mature right where it is in the bone marrow. And basically what they're going to do is develop something called immunocompetence and self-tolerance. Now, immunocompetence and self-tolerance is basically where that where the lymphocyte is able to recognize a specific antigen. All right, and then self-tolerance means we're now not going to attack self cells. We're not going to attack our own cells, right? So it needs to mature, and when it's maturing, it is becoming specific and it was becoming self-tolerant. Once that happens, you'll see the arrows leading from the thymus and the bone marrow down towards a lymphoid organ. In this case, it's going to be a lymph node. And what they do is they, quote, seed it, meaning they go and they sort of take up residence in that area. And when they seed the organs, right, that's when they are going to be able to be active and encounter an antigen, because most of our antigens are going to come through the lymph nodes, right, or the spleen or any of those things. And when they come flowing through, if these mature B and T cells are there and they encounter that antigen, boom, then we're going to activate, proliferate, and differentiate. So it is, they originate in the bone marrow, they mature in either the thymus or the bone marrow, then they seed the organs, meaning they go and they wait. They're sitting there, they're waiting, we're like, we are ready, we're mature, we're ready. They encounter an antigen and they say, bam, we're going to proliferate, meaning divide, and differentiate, meaning they're going to become very specific for what they do, and then we're going to have what are called effector and memory cells, right? So these guys are going to be the cells that circulate in the blood and lymph, right, and become protective long term. So this is really important. So take some time with the slide, go into the PowerPoint that is not the video one, and take a minute with this. It's a good one. So an overview of B and T lymphocytes. I love a B and T lymphocyte compare and contrast for the midterm, so make sure you can do this, where it is, what it does, how it's where it matures, all of that. So do a little B and T lymphocyte compare and contrast. All right, and this is a great place to start. Now, here we have a B cell response. All right, and so this, we have a primary response, and then we have our secondary response years later. So this is just showing how we have those, the B cells that are just sort of waiting, and then they encounter that antigen, And you'll notice the top line, there's a green one, a dark blue one, and a light blue one. This antigen happens to bind right here. So these are the ones that are going to be activated and proliferated, right? And then we have clones of them, and then we have lots of them. And so now we've taken care of our first response, sort of the first time you see this virus. And now we have these guys floating around in our bodies forever. So when we see it again, there's a more rapid response and you don't get sick. So this is sort of the memory portion. The adaptive immunity, right? Again, it is cell-mediated T cells. It is antibody-mediated B cells, right? The cell-mediated is called our cellular immunity. And then the B antibody immunity is called our humoral immunity, right? Antibodies or cells. The bottom line, though, when you look all the way to the right, destruction of antigen. Doesn't matter if the pathogens and the phagocytizers are going to do it and rip them apart, or if the antibodies are going to render them non-functional. Either way, the adaptive immunity's role, either cellularly or humorally, is to get rid of and destroy the antigens. Right? This one right here is showing you the time frame. Right? So here we have our first exposure. Notice how it's day 5, and you start really sick around day 7, and then you start to feel better, right? Then when you're exposed the second time, this is your secondary immune response. You don't even feel, right? You don't even feel that because your body has taken care of it. And then, oh, but here we are, a new one. So one antibody does not cover everything. They're specific. Specific. All right. So humoral immunity. Let's do a little bit of specifics on that. This is the antibody part. This is the proteins that circulate around, produced by the B cells. Right, we're going to do a minute on that. Then we're going to do a couple minutes on cellular immunity after this. So when we're talking about humoral immunity, we have the B lymphocytes are activated by the antigen. They undergo selection and they grow and they multiply. Most of the cells are going to become plasma cells that actually attack, right, that antigen, and then the rest of them are going to become memory cells. So we know this already. We also have our primary, so it would be our primary and our secondary immune responses, right? Now, when we step back and look at humoral immunity, antibody-driven immunity, there are kind of two arms of that. We have something called active, and we have something called passive. Active immunity is when the body actually mounts an immune response to an antigen. So that's the body physically creating those cells in response to something that has entered the body. Now you can have active immunity two ways. You can have it naturally, meaning someone sneezed on me and all of a sudden I have the flu and the flu thing goes up my nose and now I have the flu virus in my body. That's a naturally acquired infection that I sort of ran into. You can also have an artificially acquired active immunity, meaning a vaccine. So intentionally, somebody injects you with the polio vaccine when you're a kid, and then your body takes that polio vaccine, makes antibodies for it, and you won't get polio. So active means your body created the cells. Passive immunity means your body took in those antibodies, right? So there's a couple different types of ways you can do that. Naturally acquired passive immunity, the most common way, right, is fetus via placenta or an infant drinking mother's milk when the antibodies are passed naturally from parent to child. You can also have a intravenous, right, an injection of artificially acquired antibodies. Right now we're in the middle of coronavirus 2020, and they're looking into harvesting the antibodies from people who've already had coronavirus to see if those will protect somebody who hasn't. So that's pretty interesting. Short term, they're used to usually treat infections, immunodeficiencies, poisonings, things like that. So it's sort of a up and coming kind of thing, right? Things like botulism, rabies. What are some other ones that I wrote down here? Tetanus. Those are all going to be things that are artificially acquired humoral immunity. So naturally acquired and artificially acquired, but active and passive. Active means your body actively created the antibody. Passive means you pulled in the antibody. Either way, all four of these means you received some antibodies somehow, right? And they're going to hopefully work for you. Now, another way to put it, right? Active and passive, non-specific, right? Basically, we want the ability to resist infection and disease. So what's an antibody? An antibody is basically a 4 polypeptide chain. We have 2 heavy chains. We have 2 light chains. We have the constant version, or the constant region, and the variable region. So most antibodies are going to look the same. Their constant regions are going to be the same. However, the variable regions are going to differ based on the antigen that that antibody is created to destroy. So the basic antibody structure, 2 heavy, 2 light, a variable region, and a constant region. The antibodies are divided into 5, IgM, IgG, IgA, IgD, and IgE. They all do different things. We're not worried about that. But how do antibodies work? So they basically work in 4 different ways, or there are 4 things that they do. 1, they can inactivate by neutralizing. So that's top left, right? It's going to stick to it and neutralize it, and that bacteria or that virus can't do anything. They're going to agglutinate. They're going to cause cells to clump up. If they clump up, the phagocytizers can get there and eat them. They're slow. They don't convey infection, clump up. Similar to precipitation. Precipitation means all of the antibodies clump together. So it's similar to agglutination, except agglutination is cells clumping. Precipitation is all the antibodies clumping with the antigen. But again, large complexes, they settle out. Phagocytizers can get them very easily. And then the last way is what's called complement fixation. So we have this complement, and it basically binds to the antibody and leads to the cell lysis, which you see at the bottom there. So 4 things. They can neutralize it, they can agglutinate it with cells, they can precipitate it with antibodies, or they can bind with complement and burst the cell open. So these are the 4 ways that antibodies will work in the body. And there are many, many, many different viruses, bacteria, and pathogens. We can't go over every one of them, but there's 4 ways that this happens. All right, so now this is going to be our cellular immunity. So you'll see at the top we have our red bone marrow. We have the beige rectangle in the middle that says that these cells are going to go to the thymus to mature. So now we're creating our cellular immunity. We're creating our T cells. And those T cells, you'll notice how we have CD4, we have CD8. All right, so activated CD4 cells, these guys over here, right? The CD4 cells are going to become what are called helper T cells or regulatory T cells. See down here? So we have helper T cells and regulatory T cells. So we have helper, regulatory, and cytotoxic. What do the 3 things do? Helper cells activate B cells to make antibodies. They activate T cells and they activate macrophages. So the helper cells basically sound the alarm. We need antibodies, we need phagocytizers, we need macrophages, we need T cells. The regulatory T cells are going to moderate the immune response. We don't want to go overboard. We only have a couple of flu viruses. Don't go crazy, right? So the regulatory does exactly what the name says it does. It regulates your immune response. We don't want something to go crazy. The CD8 cells on this side here, the CD8 cells are going to become what are called cytotoxic. And if you think about what cytotoxic means, cyto means cytoplasm or cytosol, and toxic means toxic. So we're going to destroy cells. So cytotoxic T cells destroy cells, all right, and other foreign substances. All right, so we've got our helper cells that sound the alarm, our regulatory T cells that sort of make it moderate the response, and the cytotoxic T cells that attack and kill infected cells or other foreign substances, bacteria, etc. All right, 2 other slides, the helper T cells in humoral immunity, meaning they're like, hey, we need some antibodies so that helper T cell is going to stimulate that B cell activation. On the right-hand side, we're going to, the T cell is going to bind, and it's actually going to activate the CD8 cell. So it actually helps in both humoral and cellular immunity. All right, here's our cytotoxic T cell, and this is a really cool picture of that cell surrounding and engulfing a cancer cell, right? Because the cytotoxic T cells are going to destroy the cancerous cells or any cells that need to be destroyed. This is a really busy slide, but it's really, really important. It tells you basically each cell, B cells, memory cells. It does mix the B's and T's together, but it gives you what each cell is, the adaptive immune response, what it does, and at the bottom, the different molecules that are important as well. One thing we didn't talk about are the cytokines. The cytokines are a chemical signal, such as those interferons that we talked about, that help to amplify the immune response, in case we needed to boost up a little. Cytokines are becoming a big focus of the COVID-19 virus, in that a lot of people are experiencing symptoms of what's called a cytokine storm, meaning it's telling the body to create more and more immune response. And that's why people are having heart issues, cardiovascular issues, gastrointestinal issues, lung issues. It's where those cytokines are really triggering that inflammation. It's really interesting to look at the cytokine role in COVID-19. One of the last things we're going to talk about is going to be something called the effector T cells. Where are those? Oh, okay. I guess I don't have those anywhere. Effector T cells, where are they? Well, I guess I don't have a slide for that. I guess I'll just talk about them. So the effector T cells are when we have an active infection, and the helper T cells stimulate the proliferation of other T cells and B cells that already have become bound to an antigen. The cytotoxic T cells, and then the regulatory T cells. So the three helper, cytotoxic, and regulatory T cells, again, with their definitions. Now that I'm remembering, I have already talked about that. And then this table, again, 21.8, great overview, a good one to keep around as you're studying and learning, right? And things we want to talk about are things keep in mind, sort of big picture with the immune system. What about organ transplants, right? With we have to reduce our immune function in order that the body holds on to the new organ. Immunodeficiencies, autoimmune disease, hypersensitivities, right? Which would be allergies, all kinds of things that the body's immune response is not appropriate to the situation. So it's always interesting to think about that when we're talking about the immune system as well. All right, so this is the simplified summary of the immune response. We have an antigen that comes in, our adaptive defenses versus our innate defenses. If we go to the right first, let's start with the innate defenses. The surface barrier, the internal defenses, say it still gets in. May activate the B cell, right, and may create antibodies. On the right-hand side, if it gets in, right, we have the antigen-infected body cell is engulfed by dendrites. It's going to become an antigen-presenting cell, and then we're going to differentiate those T cells. So this is a nice overall summary of what happens when an antigen enters the body. Innate side, adaptive side, and you can walk through it and just sort of have an understanding about it. It is pretty complicated, but spend time on it. Again, go into mastering, watch the videos, and let me know if you have any questions. This is a body system chart that shows how each of the body systems plays a role with the lymphatic system. So remembering that we're studying each one of our body systems individually, but that they are all part of one body. So they do all work together in certain ways. So kind of reviewing this is important just to keep sort of a whole body concept open. And again, at the end of the PowerPoint, you can run through a bunch of quiz questions if you'd like. If we were face to face, we'd be running through them together. But I'm going to leave that for you guys to do on your own. All right, have a great day.